Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Hopefully a couple more people will arrive just in time. Thank you. So, the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, comes into force on the 25th of May 2018. With it, it significantly strengthens data protection for individuals by placing a series of controls and restrictions upon organisations which process, gather, store, control that information. From a business point of view, it's very easy to see GDPR as a threat. Yet another piece of legislation that has to be adhered to with no clear business benefit apart from achieving compliance. When discussing GDPR, people don't fail to mention the fines because they are so large. 20 million euros, or 4% of annual global turnover. And in doing so, it's really important to understand the scale of those penalties, because that underlines the importance of achieving compliance, but it also does emphasise that it's a threat. So should we just see GDPR as a threat, or are there opportunities? Are there technology opportunities to create solutions and products that will help organisations aid in their desire to achieve compliance? Are there business opportunities for new methods of customer engagement that put the customer first and give them control of their data? And are there regulatory opportunities? If we see the EU as the gold standard of data protection, could we in Jersey be the platinum standard? And if so, what benefits would that bring? So here to discuss those points and others are our panel of experts. So, starting on my left, we have Vicky Magalhaes. Ricky's the head of offshore security for Logicalis, with over 18 years' experience designing and implementing cybersecurity solutions, consulting at the highest level with organisations such as IBM, Intel, Cisco and Microsoft, providing training and advice to governmental organisations across the globe. It's no exaggeration to say that Ricky is a world-leading expert in cybersecurity.
Thank you.
We have Vicky, called to the English bar in '96 and the Jersey bar in 2008. Vicky is an advocate specialising in employment law at Callington Chambers, which is the boutique law practice that she founded here in Jersey in 2013. Passionate and knowledgeable about technology and technology law, Vicky is a well-known and active member of the local technology community. She can often be found participating in discussions on the Tech Tribe Slack channels, where her regular contributions on the legal ramifications of applying technology are highly valued. Next to Vicky we have Graham Hughes. Graham is the Chief Executive of Shore and has been with Shore since the company launched in Jersey 12 years ago. With Shore offering consumer and business telecommunication services, operating data centres and providing professional services, Graham is intimately familiar with the challenges of running a profitable and growing technology business in the face of ever-increasing legislation. And at the end we have Emma Martins. Emma is the Information Commissioner for Jersey. That gives her a remit over data protection and freedom of information. She's also the Data Protection Commissioner for Guernsey. These dual roles give her pan-island regulatory oversight. And the OIC, the independent body that she leads, is charged with enhancing information governance across the Channel Islands, helping the islands maintain their reputation as a well-regulated jurisdiction, and assisting organisations with meeting their obligations. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you your panel. So my name is Phil Ruelle, and I've recently taken on the role of Chief Digital Officer at BDO. And that does mean I am the CDO of BDO. My role is to help clients select and integrate technologies throughout their business. So inverting that normal approach of taking a business function and looking for technologies that can help you optimise, improve and automate it, and instead taking a technology-led approach and saying, what threats does this technology bring? But more importantly, what opportunities does it bring? And often that will lead to new methods of client communication, that will lead to new products, and ultimately new business models. But not today. Today, I have the easiest job in the room. I shall be passing the questions over to these guys. You can think of me as a David Dimbleby with less grey hair, or a Jeremy Paxman, but maybe slightly more aggressive. So I will be placing the questions. However, it's not just me. We would like this to be an interactive session. Okay, so if you have something you'd like to say, it doesn't have to be a question, it could be a comment, it could be a response to something that one of the panellists has said, or it could just be to recount an experience or an example to back up a point that's already been made. So if you would like to join in, we would be most appreciative. And so, in the words of Julie Andrews, let's start at the beginning, a very good place to start. So, at the beginning, if you look at ownership, okay, who owns this? This regulation is called GDPR. Data is in the title. So, if I was the managing director of a business here, I would probably think data means computers. This is an IT problem, isn't it?
Can I start, or do you want to start?
Well, it is absolutely no cop-out here. Accountability and responsibility for this is at the very top. That's at the board level. And the view that it's just another project for IT to deal with is completely nonsensical. I've seen two large projects, for example. I can recall recently Y2K compliance, the transition into the millennium, and in my previous role, the euro. You cannot underestimate how important it is to get these things right. And in our business already, we've pulled together a team of 4 with a leader who is reporting directly into ExCo, which is our operational board. And we've already started on this, and 18 months is going to pass pretty quickly. So we need to get on with it. And of course, there is still, I won't say ambiguity, but there's still some more clarification needed. And it would be quite easy to say, well, we're going to wait until everything's in black and white and draft and then deal about it then. That again is not an option. 18 months is going to pass incredibly quickly.
Can I just take it back to basics in a way and ask the audience to have a think about what the single most valuable non-consumable asset that their company has? And I would like to suggest that it might be data, that without that, you're pretty much nothing. Whatever it is you do, whether you work in government, whether you're private sector, data is sort of the lifeblood, staff, clients, all that. So the valuation of data, I think, is a starting point for some of these conversations. Understanding that it's fundamental to your business model in a way that it hasn't necessarily been in the past. And I think, but it's more important than that. GDPR now starts to encompass things like genetic information, because it's a fundamentally important question as to what happens to that when it's actually data that is you, essentially. So there are 2 strands to this. I think the economic pressures and challenges and opportunities and threats we'll talk about, hopefully, but also sort of moral, ethical imperative for us to get this right for ourselves and for our families and for the next generations, that we use data in a responsible, ethical and moral way. So I think there are 2 real drivers in this area. The sort of valuable nature of data and information, but also the importance of treating that information morally. And I think my answer to your question, Phil, would be that it spans traditional subfields now, this GDPR especially, in a way that is pretty much unprecedented. It's not just the IT people, it's not just the data protection officer. If it's so fundamental to a business, it has to be everybody, but it has to start at the top. You're absolutely right. It has to be engagement at board level, but every single member of your organisation has a part to play. So it's everybody. And I think the beauty of this panel is that look at the mix of skills sitting on this table. It's no longer just for the lawyers to worry about or just for the IT guys to worry about. It's all of our responsibility to get this right. So it's a multi-skilled area going forward.
Okay.
I would agree with that and say that when you're thinking about it from a business perspective, it's a fundamental strategy issue which has got to be addressed by the whole business, starting with the top. You have to have that leadership from the top so that it can filter down, but there has to be clarity, and people throughout the organisation need to understand their responsibilities as well. So everybody has to understand that within their roles, no matter what they do within the business, they will be creating data, and that they need to manage that and help deal with it responsibly in the interest of the organisation and in the interest of the individuals concerned. So I think that strategic thinking is really, really important, and I would really like to see a bit of a wholesale shift in thinking in terms of our approach towards these issues. And I think you can apply that same idea of it being a really critical strategic issue to the island as a whole. I would like to see this being addressed from primary school level throughout to all of the politicians. So it's not just an issue that one or two of our politicians can engage with. Everybody needs to understand how critical and fundamental it is. And I think that children are, whether they're playing Minecraft online or Moshi Monsters or whatever else they're doing, they are going to be engaging with their friends using data. It's normally the children who know how to switch on and off the gadgets in the household and going to be the first on there each day. So I'd really like to make sure that during education, schools are thinking about working with children so that they understand the value that they are creating data and that has a value and that's important, how we look after that. So I would like to see the whole island recognising this as of strategic importance.
Okay, thank you.
I've had 4 calls today, and they've been with business. 2 of them vendors, 2 of them customers, and they were all talking about GDPR for an hour long. What should we do? When is it coming? All C-level execs. So I think they're taking it really seriously. I am very intrigued why the execs aren't sitting here listening very carefully to what we're saying, because it's coming very soon.
Okay. I was going to say, you presumably invited them to this event?
I have, yeah. just now.
Okay, great. So clearly this is something that needs to be owned throughout the organisation and therefore requires training and communication internally. I'd just be interested to know, going out to the audience, if we could have a show of hands, how many of the organisations that you work for have communicated internally about GDPR to you and said you have requirements around this legislation? Okay, so not many. Okay, well hopefully after this session there may be some more comms forthcoming. Okay, so we understand a little bit about ownership and how it has to be throughout the business, but in terms of data, there are so many statistics out there about the rate of creation of new data. And part of this issue is the systems that are out there that are automatically pulling data in. They're capturing things through cookies, they're looking at IP addresses, they're feeding this information into big data systems that are now processing those, and they're looking at behaviours and storing that information. To what extent is all of that going to be covered by GDPR? Because this is now fundamental to how so many businesses operate. Is this something that GDPR is going to cover?
I can get that one. I think that the data that GDPR is looking at covering is data that identifies individuals specifically with information that is relevant to them. Emma, you could probably get that, but the metadata like IP addresses and all that, if it can't be linked back to the individual, I don't think that's that key in this regulation.
It's all about being able to link it back, even if it's on some future date. You need to think about that in linking that data going forward. But the GDPR widens the definitions to a significant degree of personal data into things like location data. So you need to think very, very carefully if you're processing that and how you're going to manage that and manage that compliance going forward. So, yeah.
I think the challenge for us as a telco, we principally collect data for 3 reasons. To run the business, and that's the call data records that we can use to bill customers. We have an obligation under law enforcement, so we keep data there. And of course, there's the data that we collect with approval to use for what I would call your USP, your ability to interact and engage with your customers in a way to support the business. And I think that the key is at making sure that you use the data that not using the data that you've collected for one reason for another, and that's part of the training program that we're putting in place. But of course, again, there's the data that you don't know is being collected about you, and I'll use the example of the iPhone and the way that we all sign up to these apps, and we're so excited to get on there, we just scroll through the terms and conditions and accept it, and then we're away. And of course, that's the start, because all this data, especially with location services, for example, the data is just coming in droves. And, you know, we don't control it as a telco. It just goes straight back through our networks to the app providers that are collecting it. So it is very difficult. And I've just started a premise that we've got to worry about everything and then draw down and eliminate rather than just think of the things that we obviously think we need to do.
Okay, so in order to identify that data, so GDPR has, as Emma said, widened the definition of what is personal data. As an organisation, how do I go about managing this huge wealth of data where it may be about properties, but it may be about properties that people are related to, it may be around investments, it may just be addresses, it could be such a wide range because of the introduction of computerisation into every aspect of a business. How do I go about picking out what is GDPR, which is impacted by GDPR, and that which I can actually be more free in the way I process it?
If I can, sorry, can come in. I think it's very important in an organisation handling personal data that you have somebody that is there in representing data protection. So, and the very first step, and this 2018 may seem a long time away, but the work that you need to do is significant. So you can't go in a direction of travel unless you know where you are now. So knowing where you are now involves a data audit. So we would recommend at this point, not next year, not at the end of 2017, certainly not 2018, but today, what data do you hold? Is it covered by the current and future legislation? How did you get that data? Did you have consent? Can you evidence that consent? Why are you handling that information? Why are you keeping that information? How do you destroy it? It's a very, out with the data protection, these are all good business things to do anyway in terms of information governance. So start from today as doing a data audit. Many, many years ago when I was data protection officer, I just sat with a blank sheet of paper and started from scratch. What does this organisation have? Why does it have it? What does it do with it? Who has access to it? Are they entitled to have access to it? Really basic questions. A lot of the answers to these problems are going to be technological, but a lot of the questions need to start from a basic premise of what exactly are we doing now, and have we the authority and lawfulness to do that. So I would certainly strongly suggest organisations that are handling any data to start with some sort of audit using your data protection expertise in-house if you have it.
And I think that's I entirely agree, and I think that it's a point of realising that we can't just wait until March or May 2018. We can't leave everything until that point. Businesses have to start thinking about now in a strategic way, planning for it, planning these different steps, thinking about who needs to be involved, who's going to take responsibility, and what the different skill sets are that you need to manage this. So partly it's going to be, you might need some legal knowledge, you'll certainly need organisation, you'll need some technical knowledge, and bringing those teams together. But it may well be that in itself, doing that audit, is an opportunity, because information is a key asset of the organisation. If you sit down and say, well, what information do we have? And from there you can work out, how can we best use this information? How can we use it most efficiently? Oh, I'd completely forgotten I was working with John Smith. Isn't he the head of such and such a bank? It's time we got in touch with him again. So this will give businesses a chance to really think about where they are now and where they want to go, and how they can make proper, good business use of that data in the interest of their clients.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, technically, well, I like this approach. Emma said start now. I completely agree. I think technically it's a challenge after the audit to start putting things in place that will help you govern the data in the way that GDPR requires. So the sooner that everyone starts, the better. I think that people are going to leave it too late, and this is already written and ready to go. So it's going to be interesting.
I'd like to make the point that to maybe not to see it so much as an obstacle of successful business, but rather an objective of successful business, because protecting the data, protecting the assets your organisation has got to be a good thing, hasn't it, if you're going to deliver a good business model. So consider an object, whether you're working for government, whether you're working in private sector, protecting what is valuable to you has got to make good business sense. Yes, there may be some pain in getting to that place, but it's pain well invested. And it takes longer to do the right thing in this field than it does to do something badly. So let's do something well and it may take some time, and it will take from now to 2018, believe me, if your organisation has data. But there is a reward, there is a prize at the end of this. Because a lot of relationships in business are built on trust and built on confidence. And if your clients have trust in the way that you're handling their data, trust and confidence, especially in government, especially in commercial relationships, then you will have a better relationship with those people. So there is a prize at the end of this, and it's often talked about as a problem, as a threat, and I think we just need to shift the way we're looking. This is happening. This is happening. There is nothing going to stop this train now. May 18. So let's not talk about it in those terms, and let's use it as an opportunity to say, how can this provide us with an opportunity to do really, really well in the space of data?
I agree with that, and I think Jersey should be doing that anyway. We're in the trust game, we're in the finance game. Why are we not already doing this? This is how we can show value to the rest of the world as the Rolls-Royce in industry of how to do this properly.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that kind of brings us back to the point I mentioned in my opening words about this opportunity perhaps for Jersey to be the platinum standard, to take the EU standard and actually, in a game of data protection poker, we'll take their stake and we'll raise them one. I mean, what would be the business benefit and the opportunities in doing that? Is it a reputational thing, or would there actually be additional services that we could offer around that?
I think there's immediate tactical advantage, and what I mean by that is at a business level. And again, we compete in a market both locally and globally. So I think tactically, absolutely, and it's about your point about being seen to be owning and managing data in a very right and proper way. I think from a national level, Jersey being able to position itself, and I guess we will sort of be running parallel with this in Guernsey, but I think it's two jurisdictions together. I think being first is always a good thing, not necessarily bleeding edge, but getting into a position where we have the real clarity on what we are doing. Because there will be uncertainty. We aren't the only ones sitting in a room like this, talking about GDPR coming in 18, 19 months' time. There will be others, and I think there is an advantage and a proposition for Jersey to be first to the market, if I can use that as a phrase, with clarity, and I guess some marketing around that. And I've not really thought about how you can market your position, but I think maybe a job for Digital Jersey in that.
Fortunately, Tony's not.
He's gone, yeah. He slipped
Just
out
when we
if I
need
give him
him.
a job.
There's a few opportunities, sorry Phil, that I see happening here. Firstly, we deal in data here in Jersey, trust, right? We're a little island, middle of the sea. We sell stuff that is less tangible. But this is very tangible. Firstly, this is a global thing. This is going to affect people all over the world, and it's something we can export. I'm glad most of my competitors aren't here because we're already making money on this standard globally. Our project manager's sitting in the audience, and he's already in charge of a project somewhere at a university that this has a high impact on. And I see this as a huge opportunity for Jersey. You can sell all sorts of things related to this in the legal fraternity and otherwise. And I've seen some emails recently from some people that are sitting in the audience saying to their customers as leaders in the market, guys, are you worried about this? This is a real thing. And they're sitting here today. So this is definitely something we should pay a lot of attention to, and an opportunity for Jersey to shine. And I think this is something we can do together.
So this is obviously a very positive thing. Sorry, Emma.
Yeah, and I was saying we're starting in a position, we've got a really good compliance structure, haven't we, in terms of the finance industry? So why not build on that? You're after high quality, you're not after watering down legislation, you're after actually improving it and making it workable. It's got to be workable for industry. And I think specifications of law are, in a sense, only one of the factors here. And culturally, are we an island? Are we professionals that embrace and understand data and all of the things that encompasses? Because I think however good your law is and however good your strategy is, bad culture will eat all of that for breakfast. So we need to move to a place as a jurisdiction where we understand the opportunities, we understand the risks, and we work with those in a really strategic, innovative way whilst meeting the standards and whilst protecting individuals' rights. And I think that's doable. We just need to engage. And I know it's really quite sad, but I'm excited for this sort of panel because I think you've got the incredible skill sets in front of me excluded, that all have this conversation now. And it is, let's move from a place of, more compliance, more red tape, to how can we transform our economy, our jurisdiction, everything about what we do and how we do it in a really positive way. And I think we can.
I think that's one of the interesting things to talk about actually, is how this is across disciplines. And so, for example, it can involve lawyers and accountants and technical experts and trainers and teachers all working together to create new products. So you're going to be looking at things like training, you're going to be looking at data management services, all the techie people. There's loads of opportunities in terms of anonymization or encryption services. But there are going to be brand new products and opportunities. So, for example, data management packages, where I would expect you to see people from completely different industries drawn. And I think that one of the real opportunities for Guernsey, particularly being quite a small island, is the ability to set up very quickly groups of experts and expertise who can start thinking about new products and opportunities. And if the gold standard is meeting EU requirements, I think the platinum standard is actually being positive and excited about those and thinking, let's do something different. Can Jersey have a B&Q of data services? Let's have something a bit more. It always sounds very gloomy and depressing, doesn't it? And getting hit over the head with yet another compliance stick. But actually, couldn't this be a shopping trip where we can start creating new products? It's a bit of a sidetrack, but I was in Mothercare looking for a present for my 5-year-old niece recently, and I saw that you could buy a bright pink plastic CD player with a karaoke machine. And there's no reason why we can't have products which are specific for different categories of individuals. There are all sorts of services and opportunities. It's not just negative. It's not just about compliance.
Excellent. Well, I'm slightly tempted to wrap the talk up now, and let's go and do it, because I'm excited. So mentioned in that was about data audit, and one of the things that we tend to find is that the output of an audit is a document and generally a policy, and corporates love policies, but the problem with the policies, they need to be enacted, and it feels to me that a documentation exercise off the back of this is not going to be what's required. We're going to need some kind of solution that's going to allow us to implement the requirements and run in the background. Otherwise, we run that risk of those policies just gathering dust on a shelf. I mean, I don't know what you guys think. I mean, what is the opportunity there around technological solutions to actually implementing the compliance or achieving the compliance to GDPR?
Before you get onto that, which is hopefully maybe Ricky, I would say that documentation is a new and significant part of GDPR compliance. That's something you can't avoid going forward. You're going to need to document how you assess the privacy impact of what you're doing, any new projects, any new systems you're putting in. You're going to have to document it. So if the regulator arrives on your doorstep, you can say, here's what we've done and here's why we've done it, rather than saying just a random meeting a few years ago we decided to do something. So you are going to need to document it. I'd like to think as a regulator we can help support you with that process and provide you with some toolkits and some templates, something along those lines, to enable compliance. But I think that I can't get away from the fact that you're going to need to do some more documentation around this stuff. But once you get it in, it should run by its own momentum, and you get that buy-in. Some ransomware attack recently I heard of with some junior member of staff clicked on an email which looked appalling. I mean, no one should have clicked on that. That's a training issue. Once you've nailed that, once staff are aware and understand the risks, they might think, can I just check before I do that, or bin it straight away? So some of these areas, a lot of them, as I say, are technological in how you respond to them, but a lot of them are more basic than that. And if you get the basics right, the rest will flow through. So on to the technological response, maybe, Ricky.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think this is double-sided. So in all my security training, I've realized that there's two things. There's the administrative controls, which is all the documentation that you need, and those go hand in hand with the technical controls. Technical controls for this particular regulation, on the way over here in the car, I was phoning a development company, and I was saying to them, guys, do you want to develop a tool set that would actually help answer the questions, but not actually put the documentation in place, because for that you need some people. So it's the people, the process, the technology. Those three things. And they have to go hand in hand. And funnily enough, the documentation is as important, because if you can't prove diligence, that you've actually gone through that by documentation, the fines get even higher. So this is where you have to have the documentation in place. The technology, I see a lot of technology people here in the crowd, some that develop services, others that have web development companies, etc. That's an opportunity for them right now. So.
And I would say, sorry, documentation is only a waste of time if it's not done well.
Okay.
Well, it might be done well at the beginning. I think one of the massive problems with policies is you can spend hours and hours on them, and maybe getting a consultant and burn several £1,000s and tickety-boo and very shiny, and then somebody sticks it in the cupboard.
Yeah.
And this is a classic problem for HR managers, for example. They spend a lot of time preparing staff handbooks and consulting with each other about it, and then get stuck in the cupboard, and everybody says, oh, thank God that's done. We've done the policies. And nobody actually knows what these things say and follow them. And again, that's why it's so important that the organisation works together, and that somebody takes responsibility for leading it and says, okay, how are we going to run this together? How are we going to make sure that it flows through the whole of the organisation? And so policies do actually have to be put into practice and implemented. You can't just stick them in the cupboard.
But it's that cascading. We have the audit, we write the policy framework, we put it on the intranet. I think everybody gets it. And we all work in organisations where we have people need to learn and pick things up in a different way. And you have to make sure, and whether it's through some form, and we're looking at some form of sort of compliance. We do some DP. We always do DP training, both in induction and on an annual basis. But getting some way of measuring their understanding, and do they realise their responsibility, right from the shop floor in the retail to those more senior in the company that are controlling and managing that data. We have to recognise you can throw as much technology at the problem. It's always, nearly all instances are because of either human error, either intentional or accidental. So it's back to getting the education out.
And another point of the GDPR is that all public sector organisations are going to require a data protection officer, and certain private sector are going to require, it's mandatory for high-risk processing. So even if you're not required by law to have one, it's so terribly useful to have one point of contact in your organisation that can be used. And they're not just technical, they're not just legal, they are about culture, and they're about disseminating that message constantly throughout the organisation, that data protection is good for your business and how to do it well.
Okay. Just picking up on a point that was made earlier around training. It's a very specific question, but it's one that I was asked before coming to this event. And it's around responsibility. So I have to prove as an employer that I've taken reasonable steps and that I've trained my staff appropriately. Am I still then responsible for their actions, be them either because they've just been irresponsible or actually they've been malicious?
I think the short answer is going to be yes. Generally speaking, if it's in the normal course of employment, then yes, the employer is likely to be liable. It's a traditional vicarious liability. So that is my expectation of how it would apply under the GDPR as with other areas of business.
It's worth pointing out that there is a specific offence in the current legislation of sort of data theft, as it were. So if it's knowing and reckless, if it's done knowingly and recklessly, so the individual has known they're not entitled to do something, they've done it recklessly, where we've been successful in taking those cases is where the organisation has evidenced really good training saying you're not meant to do X. That individual has then gone and done it, knowing, and you can demonstrate the knowing that they've done something they shouldn't be. So that's terribly important in terms of your staff and training and awareness, that you can evidence that in their performance review and appraisals and their training documentation and so forth. Because it's where those individuals say, well, no one told me I couldn't. No one told me I couldn't take that data and do X with it. So that's another thing to think about in terms of your HR processes as well.
Okay. Graham made an interesting point earlier about terms and conditions, and he's absolutely right. We've all done it. We've all downloaded something, and it comes up with a 15-page terms and conditions, and it gives you a little button that you can just click without going through it, and nobody reads them, and we all accept it. In order to be compliant with GDPR, do we just need to bury everything in the terms and conditions? Can we basically say we will do anything we like with your data as long as it's in the terms and conditions? Is that a valid get-out clause?
It changes because what this has done is it says you can't do that. So if you read very carefully, it says you can't just put I agree and wherever you move your mouse, I agree follows it. It says that you need to put it by default on I don't agree, and then the user has to action that. So you can't trick the user into clicking I agree. So I think that's where there's a big change. So people are going to have to read what's happening with their data. I don't know if you've seen anything different to that.
Well, I think also it's going to have to be much more specific. So instead of just giving a blanket consent to use of, tick here, yes, you can use my data for anything you like, you can sell it, under the new legislation for different types of use, the business will have to ensure that it obtains specific consent. And also you can't get somebody's consent once and then 10 years later assume that you still have an entitlement to process their health data, for example. So the consent is also going to need to be kept relevant and up to date.
I think the transparency requirements are significant going forward, and the GDPR wants you to be clear and simple and straightforward in how you're explaining to individuals what you're going to do with their data. But it also requires a vast amount of information to be communicated to the individuals. We saw a couple of years ago, I think it was PayPal or someone's privacy statement was as long as Hamlet or something insane. Who's going to read that? I mean, even as privacy professionals, we don't always read them because it's tedious, quite frankly. And quite how that will work in practice, I think, is yet to be seen. It's a real challenge. What the GDPR is trying to do is say to individual, have some autonomy, have some control, be informed. But what that looks like in an environment where it's so quick, everything we do now online is at the click of a button, literally. So it's split second. So how that works, how real meaningful consent works in the GDPR environment is going to be a challenge, and a challenge for all the different players in an organisation, but certainly one that is part of your audit. Have we relied on consent for the data that we have, and if so, what does that consent look like? Have a look at the wording of that. Is it really vague? If it's vague, it's not going to do going forward.
Can I ask a question about that? Sorry to be. This is really, really important, really. In the event that a citizen could be proven to have not read the terms against which they were giving their consent for the use of their data, and they then brought an action further down the line against the controller or processor, would the controller or processor have a case back against them to say, sorry, we can demonstrate that you spent 2.7 seconds on this page before giving consent, and therefore you can't possibly have properly absorbed what you were signing up to?
One for the lawyer.
So are you saying that they did click, but they then say, well, I didn't read it?
Yeah, we all know, we've all done it, as Phil says, we've all signed up for stuff. We do it every time we get an upgrade to our operating system on our phone, every single one of us does.
Yeah.
No one in this room has ever read, beginning to end, of the terms and conditions of an operating system update. Anyone? None of us. Not one of us. Ever. Right? So, in the brave new world, those of us who own or are running online services which require sign-up and require onerous new standards of consent, and are concerned about the risk that at some point an EU citizen will come back to us with a claim against the way in which we've used their data. If we start by putting in place processes by which we can demonstrate how long somebody has spent on a page before giving consent, would that be a defence against a claim further down the line?
I don't know the specific answer to that. What I would say is there's going to be questions of degree around these things. In the UK, it doesn't apply in exactly the same way in Jersey because we don't have the Unfair Contract Terms Act. But in the UK, you have this principle that the more onerous an obligation is, or the more it will impact on you under a contract, the clearer the provision has to be. And I think the same sort of principle applies, is that if you're going to be taking really significant amounts of personal data, or you're going to be tracking them in a way which gives you significant personal data about them, and you're going to be using it or exploiting it for many commercial reasons, then the expectation on you is going to be quite high to ensure that there is clarity. So if you end up with terms and conditions around consent, which are 30 pages long, which nobody's going to read, I think it may be much more difficult for you to defend a position than if you have a short and simple consent statement very much up front, which then takes you to more detail behind it. So I think there will be, I would have thought, increasing onus on the website owners or the people who own the information which is on the front page or obtaining the data, to make sure that it's very clear as possible and as easy as possible. Now, it's difficult when there's so much information that you have to be able to provide, but I think that the starting point is you can't just assume, you say, I agree, click here. You're going to have to think a little bit more carefully about what people are consenting to, what the implications of that might be for them, and making sure that the explanations are available. So I think that businesses will have to put more thought into it. And then if you can show that all of that information was there, it was in layman's terms, it wasn't full of incredibly complicated jargon, that everything was available to that person, and also, for example, that they got some sort of benefit out of the site. So if you're agreeing to do something because you're getting significant benefits from that site, you are getting something back. It's not like it's a one-way street. So if you can show that you've acted properly, your position is likely to be defensible. But if you do it so that it's all a one-way street and all in favour of the business, and you just make it impossible for people to get the information in the first place, because you know that the way you've laid it out, nobody's ever going to look at it, I think it's going to be more difficult for you.
But I'm not raising this because I'm seeking or thinking about any ways of evading responsibility. I'm very, very concerned about usability aspects of technology that arise from this. We're all impatient when we're signing up for anything. And yet, data controllers and processors have got to show great responsibility in demonstrating the ways in which they can use that data. The balance has got to be found. I like the idea of a kind of two-stage process by which the kind of perhaps highest risk uses of your data are presented in a way which is very easy and quick to consent to, and in consenting to that, and then clicking straight through past the detailed stuff, you are in some way acknowledging that you're skipping the detailed stuff. I guess these are things that are going to have to be worked through. But this is a really good example of one of those areas where it's hard to find the opportunity and very easy to spot the threat, unfortunately.
Can I also make the point that consent isn't the only option? Consent is talked about a lot because it obviously gives the individual, in theory at least, control as long as they read everything. But for private sector only, there is the opportunity for what it calls legitimate interests, when the rights of the parties involved are weighed up. It doesn't get you out of the transparency requirements of telling individuals what you're going to do. But the legitimate interest is something that the private sector now rely on. They don't always rely on explicit or written or any other consent. They rely on the fact that they're pursuing a legitimate interest, and they have told, and there's been clarity about what they intend to do with the data, but they haven't relied on consent per se. In some environments, that consent is going to be absolutely desirable, but not all. So, as you say, these are areas that are going to have to be thought carefully about, but I would just make that point that it may not be the only thing you need to rely on going forward.
Okay. So, one way that people talk about potentially protecting themselves would be the encryption of data or the anonymisation of data. I mean, is this a valid option? If I was to take all of my data internally and ensure that it was encrypted, and what was breached, what leaked out of my organisation was shown to be encrypted to a particular level, would that protect my organisation from any fines or any comeback from the authorities?
I mean, GDPR certainly looks at pseudonymisation, encryption, sort of quasi. It's not actually explicit in law, but they will be steps that you take to evidence seriousness in compliance of looking after your data and treating data security seriously. So that thought process, those discussions with your IT experts are going to be very, very important, and I'll maybe hand over to the others for the technical answer to that.
Yeah, so in the standard, the orange ones are the encryption ones, and you can see how many others there are as well, so it doesn't stand alone. It doesn't stand alone at all. I think that encryption is just like a lock on a door. It's for honest people, and it is breakable, and now with certain people in power, even more capable of spoofing and spying and doing all sorts of things that they might want to do. So it's up to a level of protection. I think that the diligence around it still needs to be applied of what happens to the data, and ultimately the process is going to be responsible if it's encrypted or not. because if they don't put the protection mechanisms in place when everything's online to protect it correctly, even if it's encrypted and that's breached, then the data's still out in the public. So I think it's an option, and it may show diligence, but I don't think it's the only option.
Okay. Another aspect of GDPR is the portability of data, so the ability for an end user to say to a data controller, I want you to give me my data and I'm going to give it to someone else. I mean, is there anything that organisations can do to start preparing for that? Because clearly, in terms of at a byte level, the formats that we could produce that in are innumerable. So how would an organisation go about preparing for that, or is it just something that has to sit in the background and we cross our fingers and hope that nobody ever asks us to perform it?
That's so challenging. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I think it comes right back to the audit point that Emma made at the beginning, which is that if you're dealing with, if somebody comes to you in 10 years' time and they've been a client of your organisation for 10 years and says, now I want to move my data, you just go, it would just be horrific.
Yeah.
It'd be impossible. But if at the beginning you've done an audit and you've then set a strategy and you've set a framework and you've got your IT people on board and you've got some consultants on board so that you know what the data is and you've started packaging it from the outset, then I think that should be a much more doable task. But protect people.
I think, from a commercial perspective, you think data is king and you're going to capture as much data as you can about your clients and keep it. There's two issues there. First of all, the cost of doing that is becoming increasingly more challenging, and the cost of keeping data, even electronic storage, is escalating year on year. But I think also the fact that the more data you've kept about something, if you don't need to keep it, it's more onerous to give it back to them or pass it on if they ask for a later date. So our strategy is absolutely we keep the data that we need to keep for the reasons I mentioned before, but not potentially to set yourself up for a massive workload later on, because I don't think people understand how this could pan out. The challenge in 10 years' time, where somebody asks, for a telco, for example, we have the ability to move telephone, mobile services, for example, quite easily through mobile number portability. There's information that we have to keep to allow that to happen. How long they've been a customer, the contract, the number, etc., etc. But if you get into a situation where you've got to start providing rafts and reams of data, then that becomes a real challenge.
Technically, I'd say that it's a challenge that's so difficult to solve, but it's an opportunity as well. It's an opportunity for technical people to figure out technology that will sort this out. Here, let's just look at a small use case. So let's say someone wanted to move from telco to telco. The first thing I'd do is write a policy that no one reads, terms and conditions. I happen to read those, by the way, but anyway. I am that sad, I really am. Especially Facebook, Google, Microsoft, etc. But anyway, what you do is you write that in there and you say, look, if you do portability, data portability from there to there, this is how we're going to behave. And under this regulation, there's no charge. You can't actually charge for any request for data. So you're right about the cost. But what I would do is I would say, if you're going to do that, this is how we're going to handle that information. And the other thing is keep the data, only the data that you need, and don't just keep everything. Like if you look at what big organizations are keeping on you right now, like search engines, etc. They're keeping quite a lot of information specific to you. And how do you become portable from search engine A to search engine B and enforce something like that? It's really quite tough. So I think some new technical controls are going to be developed along with the administrative controls to enable this to happen. But at this moment, I think it's a big opportunity for Jersey to invent some technological capability around this. I've got some ideas, so if you guys want to chat about it.
Okay, well the challenge is there. Thank you, Ricky. We have about 5 minutes left. I just thought at this point, before we continue, if there were any other questions that people wanted to bring out that perhaps were not directly related to any of the points that we've brought up so far. So.
I'm concerned about the misuse of information or personal information. In particular, and this is in the UK and was some years ago, but one of the things that you, when you signed up to register as an elector, you had to accept that you were going to get that information given to a company like Equifax. And Equifax then sold that information to Barclaycard and so on, and you got inundated with junk mail. And the only way you could stop it was not to be on the register of electors, because the local authority would not stop giving that information away to Equifax. And when you told Equifax to stop, by the way, they said, we're not going to stop. It's our right to use this information. The registrar, the information registrar, thought otherwise, by the way, on that matter. But the point is that if you stop being on the register of electors, then you find you can't get a mortgage because you're not on the register of electors. And that's a misuse of information. Would anybody like to comment on that? There are other examples I have.
This is exactly what the data protection legislation is seeking to deal with and remedy and stop, is this sort of multiple use and onward use without proper consent and informed consent. I mean, in the UK, the Representation of People's Act has solved that problem by saying you have to positively, I think it's possibly opt in to that subsequent use of that data, because you collect that data just to allow you to vote. You're absolutely right. It shouldn't be wrapped up, and GDPR explicitly prohibits that sort of wrapping up with a number of different areas of processing. And it's not to say some people want that data to be shared to help their credit score, but the point is, in data protection terms, we don't say it's strictly prohibitive. We say give the person a choice, give them some autonomy about that decision. We often get blamed to say you stop that processing, you stop that disclosure. That's not what we're there for. We're there to say engage the individual and allow them to opt out. So I would hopefully give you some comfort that GDPR does move to much more stringent rules around secondary processing, around the sort of wrapping up of sort of 2 or 3 areas of consent for processing. And the UK, you've seen that that now doesn't happen with those lists, and when you sign up, you are allowed to, I can't recall, forgive me, but it's opt-in or opt-out, but it's very explicit on those forms now.
I would just come back to that. I think Equifax still has that information, and so if you are going for credit, you go to the bank goes to Equifax, and Equifax says, no, you're not on the electoral register.
Maybe that's something, if you wanted further chats with our office, we're more than happy to talk in more detail. They're obviously sometimes very specific to the individual, those issues, yeah.
Thank you. Scott?
Thank you. Right. Firstly, Ricky, just because you read terms and conditions doesn't make you sad, it makes the rest of us sad for not doing it. So
Thank you, Scott.
Behaviours in organisations is going to be the hardest thing to get past, because we need to change the behaviours of how we've done it all along. And we need to get that down all of the organisation at every level. Have you got any hints or advice or tips or tricks on how you can set the behaviour change so people are doing things in the way that need to be ready for GDPR?
I think we touched on it before. It's the culture, and you know, you generally start culture changes from the top down. So you leading by example is absolutely the way to start this off. But I think it's regular training, it's reinforcement. It's to my point before, checking they understand it. Don't just put your policy document up on the intranet and expect everybody to understand it, because quite often people are reluctant to perhaps admit that they're reading something they're not quite sure. Does this mean I can do this or can I do that? So have that sort of openness to allow a challenge. You know, I don't understand quite what that means. Can I have it explained to me? And then just again regularly reinforce and check that understanding is there.
I'd say in terms of policies and things that you want people to comply with, I think that there are 2 things which are quite important. One is not making it just to stick to beat people up with. It shouldn't be just don't do this. So there needs to be, when you're implementing new things which put a burden on somebody, think about whether there's some sort of carrot you can offer as well. I think that that's always helpful. So if you can introduce something positive when you're making people do something difficult as well, I think that sets a slightly different tone. So I was going to say carrot and stick. I think it's very important, as Graham said, that it comes from the top of the organisation down. And it's very important that people buy into the process. So very often when you're introducing new burdens, it's just imposed upon people, you must now do this thing. If people are consulted with it in a meaningful way, invited, you know, how do you think we should do this? Can you help me in tackling this? Can you review the drafting of that? Do you think that will work for this team? So getting different people involved so that it's not just imposed on them from the outside, I think is quite important.
There's, sorry Phil, there's 173 clauses in this thing. And if you do 11 a month, educate your staff and build a culture of wanting to know what's in the terms and conditions, it will help. All I have to do is just talk about 10 of them every month. And some of them are pretty interesting and they will get people talking. You'll be surprised what a Friday afternoon hour meeting can do. And people start thinking, oh, I shouldn't use data that way. And again, we said individuals, we do that where we work.
Okay, and you won't be the only person in the room to read terms and conditions.
Not anymore.
Excellent. So I'm being gestured from the door. We're going to have to call things to an end there. Hopefully that's given you some food for thought. I think there's been a number of points there that show that there are opportunities here. There are opportunities around solutions for data management. There are opportunities for Jersey on the world stage to become a major player in data protection, to build that culture that will see us as world leaders. So it just remains for me to thank the audience for attending, and if you could just put your hands together for our expert panel.